Thank you to our Phoenix #1 friends and family that are watching. We'll go ahead and get started. May I get a roll call?
Yes, roll call for Ms. Bueno,
Here.
Ms. Erica de la Rosa,
Here.
Mr. Regional Carrillo, Ms. Carmen Trujillo,
Present.
Dr. Oh, there she is.
She's virtual.
And Dr. Alicia Vink.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and for all. Today's meeting is a study session where we will be discussing and studying an overview of interim goals and superintendent guardrails. Pass it over to Dr. Hagigat.
Good afternoon, everyone. President Bueno, Vice President Trujillo, and members of the board, along with cabinet and our community. Today, we have the opportunity to review our guardrails as part of our student focused outcomes. And so we're going to make sure that we have them right now up, and we'll start with guardrail number 1. The superintendent shall not allow the district to operate without reciprocal and effective communication between the board, district employees, and community stakeholders. So for interim guardrail number 1, as the team, we were looking to increase our communication as part of the overall goal of to pass on the vision of our board to our constituents. And so in a way of doing that is by us creating the board highlights. And what we're looking at is to make sure that our employees, parents, and the larger community get highlights for our board meetings a day or two after the board meeting. So our SMART goal is to increase from 0 to 11 to make sure that they are distributed to our employees, our parents, and our community. That's our interim guardrail number 1.0. And Dr. Ramos, I'm going to chime in with questions for you as you've had the opportunity to do this process. And Dr. Ramos is our consultant for students' focused outcomes. And so when we look at these goals, do we go one at a time, or how does it typically work for feedback? Thank you for your guidance.
Ideally that you as a board, this is your chance to be able to look at the measurables. So you all have identified your goals and you've identified superintendent guardrails. And now is the time to be able to get the measurables. As you've noticed in your board meetings, staff have been giving you updates regarding goals and some of the guardrails, but they've been kind of like just whatever they've got in front of them that they want to put in front of you. Now it's going to be way more organized, meaning that these are the measurables that they're coming to you. In other words, these are the outputs that we talked about. So let me give you a quick refresher. We talked about inputs, outputs, and outcomes. So inputs are the resources that are knowable at the beginning of the cycle. So right now, as school has started, during the summertime, the administration was reviewing and looking at what inputs they needed to keep, which ones they needed to get rid of, and which ones they needed to adjust. And so that's everything from curriculum, teachers, professional development, transportation, food. Those are all inputs. Budget's an input. Then you got outputs, which is what we're going to be talking about right now. The outputs is the thing, it's the measurement in the midst of the cycle of the effectiveness of the inputs. So in other words, we use the analogy of a basketball game. The players, the basketball, the court, the coaches, all of those are inputs. The end of the first quarter, into the second quarter, into the third quarter, those are outputs. Those are opportunities to measure, are the inputs working for us or not? So you all are going to be having clarity moving forward that these are the outputs you're looking at the administration is bringing to you. What happens here is, board, you want to be able to ask questions so that you're convinced that these outputs are going to get you to the outcomes that you want. So you're going to have the interim goals and the interim superintendent guardrails here. You really want to ask questions related to how does this correlate to the outcome that we're looking for? So I'll take a pause and see what questions you have there before I get to the next part.
I guess my question is, are these ones that were worked on together already, or I thought that we were gonna work on this together today. So are these are the original ones that we had weeks ago that still need work, or this is like more polished anyway? And I guess I'm just
You
wondering.
want to say that?
Yeah, so we took the goal itself and we've been polishing it as we see the goal. And so the interpretation falls into the interim guardrails. And that's why your questions are extremely important for us to make sure that we're hitting the intent of the goal. And so we've worked together as a team, meaning my administrative team, on these, and then we present them. And my understanding is that we get discussion and questions, and then we're able to either give it a thumbs up or back to the drawing board, is how I understood it.
That's correct. So Dr. Vink, the outputs are determined by the administration, your educational experts. You, though, get the chance to say, yes, I can see the correlations and I'm gonna go with these because these are what the measurements are gonna be when they come to the meeting. As you recall in SOFG, we strongly discourage the board from trying to pick inputs and outputs because that is not your role. And if you pick inputs and outputs yourselves and they don't work, then we ask you to be willing to stand in front of your community and say, these are the inputs and outputs we selected. They didn't work out. So it's on me as a board member because I overstepped my boundary. Now, the way this works is the administration has looked at data, has looked at what methodologies they can bring forth to you to prove to you that those guardrails are going to be addressed. And so you get to say, okay, you get to ask questions about the measurements that they're bringing forth to you. That's how the collaborative process works.
Okay.
Yeah. And so ideally also I would recommend we probably start with the goals, the interim goals, before we start with the superintendent interims. If that's okay, we could pull those up first. That would be ideal. Because it's good to start with student outcomes focused conversation. And if you recall, the guardrails are what we call adult outcomes, other outcomes. And in SOFG, we're unapologetic about making sure that we keep the main thing the main thing.
Thank you for that clarification, Dr. Ramos.
You got it.
Could we get the goals up, please? Thank you.
Yep, there we go.
So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gonzalez and Dr. Lloyd, and they will walk us through the goals.
Good evening, Madam President, our governing board members. Goal 1 is the goal that we will have the percent of third grade students with a pass rate on reading per the AASA, which is our state assessment, will increase from 25% on August 2023 to 40% by 2028. And if you'll recall, that's our 5-year goal. So we made those adjustments previously in a board meeting not too long ago. Now we're taking a look at our interim goals. And so you'll notice for reading, we have 3 interim goals that we believe are going to help us predict the trajectory of performance that students will show in getting to that third grade goal. So the first goal that we have is a kindergarten goal that is reducing kindergarten students performing at risk from 36% to less than 30% by spring 2024, as measured by Ames Web Plus early literacy benchmark. And then at the next interim goal is a at-risk first grade students performing at risk from 59% to less than 50% by spring 2024. As measured by Ames Web Plus early literacy, and then interim goal 1.2, reducing second grade students performance at risk from 59% to less than 50% by spring 2024. So these assessments are the district assessments that we use to monitor student progress. The label that they use is at risk. It's not our favorite kind of language. As you know, we've had many conversations that we prefer to frame it in terms of on grade level or at grade level or developing proficiency. But the test itself labels in this manner. So that's why we have this at this point in time. You'll also notice these are 1-year goals because we want to be able to, if we're truly going to be predictive of where we're going to go, we need to be able to make those 1-year goal marks so that we can make adjustments as we go. I'll entertain any questions or if Dr. Lloyd would like to add anything. You don't have to. Okay.
So just to clarify, the at-risk for us means under grade level.
Yes, so it uses the language of the snow report at risk of reading failure. And so that's where that language comes from.
And one thing about it, it's talking about being at risk for not reading on grade level at the same place where other students are at the point in time. So like a first grader, when it says they're at risk, it's not like, oh, that kid can't read at all. It's those tests are compared to peers across the nation and saying, hey, they're at risk of not reading in the way that they need to by the end of the school year so that they're ready for the next school year and reading at the rate that they need to.
I do have a question. How long have we been using the Ames Web Plus benchmark testing?
I believe this is our 5th year. I can try and confirm that. It started before I came. I want to say it was either 1 or 2 years before I came, and this is my 4th year. So,
And is something that your team is comfortable using?
We do think it's a good measure of reading proficiency. It's not the only tool that we use, though, in terms of helping our children to be proficient readers. But in terms of an assessment, it is a standardized assessment. As Dr. Lloyd said, it is normed nationally, so it really helps us to understand what the needs are for students. And it gives us a good predictive intervention guide for helping students at different points in that continuum.
Thank you for clarifying. Can you please share where the data was received on that 36%? For example, the first example, the kindergarteners, where did that 36% come from?
yeah, so that's based on last year where we ended last year. So we looked at that and we looked at the I looked up to 3 or 4 prior years and then use that to help gauge how much we could expect for the coming year in terms of what we could increase by.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on to goal 2? I would just like to request that we create a footnote just to clarify what the at-risk means to the Ames Web Plus test and not necessarily Phoenix #1.
And if I could propose, we've talked about the idea of changing it from at risk to on proficiency, in which case the numbers would flip. And I'm seeing we just think that we feel better about that language, but we wanted to present the way that the language is given in the testing domain.
I like that. I prefer that language to proficiency, since we go over that a lot too when you present the data. It's fine with me.
Okay, we'll make that change for you then.
Even with that, it's easier to read because even with reading, you're like, wait, 36 to 30%. Here we go, 30% to 36%. So even it'll just more simplify things.
Thank you for that. We will make that change.
Thank you for that recommendation.
So in goal number 2, you're going to see that the language is slightly different because now it's on grade level. And again, this comes now from the assessment. Let me start with the goal. The goal is that the percent of 3rd grade students with a pass rate in math as per AASA will increase from 29% currently on August 2023 to 54% by August 2028. So the interim goals now, again, we're looking at kindergarten, first grade and second grade so that we can provide those annual interventions in a timely basis rather than waiting until it's third grade time. And the increase then for kindergarten students performing on grade level from 52% to more than 60% by spring 2024 as measured by the iReady math diagnostic. And to help preload the question, we have been using the iReady diagnostic now in mathematics this is starting our fourth year. So our first year was the year that we were in pandemic, then the next year when we were partially hybrid. And last year and this year have been the first years that we will be using this with students present in our classrooms. But we do believe it gives us good data and helps us understand specifically what domains students are struggling in and how best to provide instruction and supports for students along the way. So in the interim goal 2.1, we're looking at increasing first grade students performing on grade level from 34% to more than 45% by spring 2024, as measured by the iReady math diagnostic. And goal 2.2, interim goal 2.2 is increasing the second grade students performing on grade level from 25% to more than 33% by spring 2024, as measured by the iReady math diagnostic. And again, these are one-year goals so that we can make continual adjustments to meet the needs.
Is there anything else that we need to know about the iReady diagnostic tests?
The iReady diagnostic test does provide, it provides a broad picture view of where students are in terms of what they know and are able to do mathematically, not only for their grade level, but sort of gives us a bigger picture of where they are in the span of understanding these mathematics. That allows us to provide what is, it's a customized plan for how to fill gaps that are missing or how to accelerate learning. It's called MyPath, and that becomes part of the intervention tool that we use with students to help accelerate learning. And it's driven by this diagnostic assessment of student learning. It's administered in the fall, early in the fall, and then again in the winter and spring.
Any other questions for goal 2? Okay. Ready for goal 3?
All right, goal 3 is set by our English language learners, and this is the percent of students who are increasing proficiency. From in the Azella, you'll remember there are 4 different levels of proficiency, and rather than expect that students are going to exit out of EL services, we're looking to make sure that students that are in the program are gaining proficiency on an annual basis. This helps to ensure that our students who have been in program for a long time are not left there to just continue struggling with it, but instead that we're really focused on how are we getting our students into different language levels. So the percent of English language learners for this goal, increasing proficiency levels at least one category as measured by Azella will increase from 32% on July 2023 to 50% by July 2028. So we only have one interim goal here, but the goal is that the percent of English learners increasing at least one placement level as measured by iReady reading diagnostic will increase from 48% to 56% by spring 2024. The reason we use the iReady reading diagnostic is because this gives us those components that students will be tested on in the Azella in terms of language fluency, word recognition, and those are important elements to how students will need to be prepared to pass the Azella or to increase proficiency in those levels.
Can you tell me more about why there's only one interim goal when this goal is it's kind of a longer goal too, July 2028? So.
Oh, I'm sorry. All of our goals are
They're all
5-year
5 years,
goals,
like-
but the interim is just a 1-year goal.
Why is but why is there only one interim goal?
Because this is, all students are taking the same measure. And so we don't have to break it down by grade level. We're looking to make sure that all students who are in program are making these gains. So the goal is encompassing of all students in program.
Regardless of their grade level?
Yes, because all students, regardless of grade level, are given the Azella test, and in order to move in proficiency, they have to show that gain. And so rather than isolate one grade level and say it's predictive of all, we think it's a better measure to show how all students in program are moving with their reading proficiency in English, so that when they take the Azella, we have a predictive accountability to ourselves that this is in fact a measure that students are going to be more successful. I think an analogy might be to think of it as all of the students are, if we have a whole team of basketball players, I'm going to use our basketball playing analogy. We have a whole team of basketball players, and we're working to make sure that they understand defense and offense, but that they also understand how to best throw their ball up to the rim and make sure that it hits the backboard just right to go into the basket. So there are 3 skill sets that we're really focusing on with our students. When we test that, we test it in practice. All the children are in practice together. And so we're watching every single one of those students for each of those different skill sets that we want to see. And then when it's time for the game, we know which of our students is going to be the student that we're going to put on the free throw line because they're best at the shooting, and which of our students are we going to have on defense guarding the other people, and which are the students that we're going to make sure are getting the ball when there's a fast break to dribble to the other end and score.
Sorry, one more question on that one. It looks like we're increasing 8% for that interim goal, and we had been closer to like 5% per year. So why do we think that we can increase 8% in a year for the spring 2024?
From 48 to 56%.
Yeah.
Dr. Lloyd, do you want to talk about your methodology with that?
Yeah. So this is just measuring the reading for those students, whereas Azella is going to measure them in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And so we're focusing in just on one specific measure of communication. So that's where we believe we can get more in just reading. The other pieces this year, we are doing additional programming for reading. For example, we've purchased an oral reading fluency assessment for all of our EL students so that we can make sure to set goals and support them more in their reading and making sure they're receiving core phonics and other additional inputs so that reading can be more of a focus. We see it as an area when we look at our data and where students often tend to get left behind or get stuck in moving placement levels, it's in reading and writing. And so we want to make sure that we focus on that reading domain to help them with, and iReady gives us that information of helping us know, like, are we able to move them specifically just in the reading domain and not measuring every domain at the same time, because it is one of the key metrics that helps us see if students are going to be successful, because usually the speaking and listening comes first, and then you have to move on to the more taught skills of more explicitly taught skills of reading and writing.
Okay. So would an 8% gain be typical growth for our students, or is that like a stretch goal?
I mean, looking at the numbers that we've had in the past for the students, between 5 to 10% is usually,
okay.
Like at the lower end, 5 would be more typical and towards 10. So we've kind of put it in the middle of that to have something we feel like is achievable, but not out of reach.
Great. Thank you.
I have a question about how So the interim goals, how quickly will we know that we need to adapt to a different goal?
We are, because of the interim goals, there are measures throughout. And when we look at our progress monitoring calendar, you'll see that we have specific benchmarks along the way that we'll be able to see, ooh, this looks like we set the wrong interim goal. Or to be able to say, okay, we set the goal too low. But we'll be able to really take a look at that through those different measures, and we'll be able to bring data to you on a regular basis so that we can talk about what are we seeing, what are the changes we're making and suggesting that we continue, or what are the programs that we continue to promote.
And Dr. Ramos, here from the interim goals, how quick do we move into the progress monitoring?
We could anticipate moving to getting a progress monitoring calendar set up as early as next month. And that's going to be based on what Dr. Gonzalez and the team has been working on. As they've been doing this, they've also been calibrating when these assessments are going, when these benchmarks are going to be ready. So they've already got a pretty good idea when that's going to be. And then just as a reminder to the board, once they bring forth a monitoring calendar, they're going to bring to you how they're going to be monitoring. You're going to be monitoring each goal 4 times a year, and your superintendent guardrails up to 2 times a year. So what you're going to be monitoring are going to be these measurables, these interims is what you're going to be monitoring. And again, you want to see the correlation that these are going to get you to your outcome, because what's happening is you as a board and as a leadership team are narrowing your focus of what your board meetings are going to be about. And so you're going to know, as she just mentioned, you're going to know, are we getting better? Are we stagnant? Or are we going down? And you don't wait till the end of the school year to make adjustments. So you as a board are going to be monitoring the data. And that in essence is your superpower in doing this, is you're not sitting back and you're not having to wait till the end of the school year. You'll know quarterly how you're looking on your goals. And so by the time we get to the 3rd quarter of the school year, you're going to have a pretty good idea if we're going to, in essence, how we use the governance language, you're going to know if you're going to win the game. You're not going to have to wait till the end of the school year to know that. So what you're doing is you're asking great questions to make sure that these interims are going to be predictive and aligned to the outcome, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're approving, in essence, outputs and measurables that are not going to get you the outcomes that you want. In other words, it is very much so possible that outputs, interim goals are identified that are not correlated with the goal. Here, you're gauging, is that the case or not? And so the questions you're asking is along those lines. You want to make sure that what's being put in front of you is going to be predictive. So you're asking about the numbers and the language and all of that. That's some excellent governance work, by the way.
And for the progress monitoring measurables, admin recommends those measurables too, right?
You're correct. They will, because they know when the benchmarks are going to be ready. So they'll bring that to you for approval, for adoption. You'll put that on your agenda. At the same time, on your board monitoring calendar is a good opportunity for you to put what board trainings you want to have. So what do you want to have annually? So do you want to have a team of 8 every June? You also want to put on your monitoring calendar when you're going to do the formative evaluation for your superintendent and when you're going to do the summative. That way you as a board are clear in communicating, but your community is also clear in communicating when you're going to be doing that. So anything that you think is pertinent, not only to the board, but for community communication, you might want to put that on your monitoring calendar and then put that on your website so that everybody knows. So for example, if somebody says, hey, I want to know when you're going to look at goal number 3, I'm glad you asked. Look at our board monitoring calendar. It's on our website. You can expect that measurable to come up before the board these 4 times throughout the year. And that's how that works. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for pointing out the website, because we do have them on the website, but they're not on the front page. So I think if we're going to be serious about this governance model, that it's on at least the front page and kind of centered to when people go to the website. That's like one of the first things that they see.
I'll add one more to you. Probably be a good idea, board, if you ask that they be printed out once they're all approved. Have your goals, your guardrails, and your board guardrails, have all 3 printed out right here on full display. Let everybody know this is how we've narrowed our focus. We're serious about literacy and mathematics, and it's just another way to do it. And there's a lot of other ways that I could share with you later, such as like board members end up putting their goals and their guardrails on the back of their business cards as well. So you can get super creative with it if you want, but you're right. Communicating it to your community, super important.
Thank you for that input. We've also requested our photos be at the front office at every site too. So I think that would be a good partner contribution to these is the board, and then these are our board goals, guardrails, and superintendent guardrails. Thank you.
Got it.
In terms of the timeline we're at right now, are we making good progress with the timeline that we have? And then I asked because then with the summative and formative evaluations, when should we begin planning those
So summative, formative for who?
for the superintendent?
So right now, what I would say for these goals, give her this year to get off the ground. This is new. So I would say pertaining to these, because you're also just now going to be looking at approving the measurables, I would not be using these anytime soon. I would wait at least a year. Yeah, whatever you've been using prior to this is what I would roll with for now, or whatever other methodology you want to use. So I would say 6 months from when this gets kicked off, you're probably looking at a good formative. No, but let me add it another way. When they bring the monitoring reports beginning probably as early as next month, those monitoring reports serve as mini formative assessments for you as a board. Because you're going to be looking at that data and you're going to say, oh, okay, administration, wow, we're doing great. We're moving along well. Or we have some hiccups. So they're going to give you the simple slide that I've showed you with the graph, a linear graph. They're also going to give you 2 additional pages. One of them is going to tell you what's not working well and where they're going to be switching up on the inputs. And then the third page is going to be what the plan is moving forward. Right? So that's the process of the progress monitoring. There's no manipulation of data, none of that kind of stuff. Not that anybody would hear, right? But this ensures that it's transparent and clear. And let's be honest, right? We want to celebrate all these kinds of awesome things. And we want to be blunt about where are we when it comes to these. So these will serve as many formative opportunities.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That it?
Madam Chair, this is Carmen. I have a quick question if that's okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I heard that these were based on last year's data. Is it safe to I don't want to assume, but is this the same data that we built our goals on? I just wonder, earlier we mentioned a footnote. I thought to myself, a footnote of like where the data comes from as far as like the year it came from would be helpful, but maybe that's just going to come with, maybe we're going to get the data when we have the progress monitoring sheet. Maybe that'll come with it. So I just want a little more clarification if we will, I guess, have a better understanding of where the data comes from, not necessarily like the measurable, the AASA, but where and when, I guess, like how current is it and that kind of stuff. So a little more clarification on that would be great, on how we got here with the data that we have, if it's the same one that we built these goals on.
Vice President Trujillo, the data in the goal is actually the data that is our historic data presented from Azella or AASA. The interim goals, because the AASA and Azella are summative reports on how students are doing, in setting the interim goals, we're using measures that we use on an ongoing basis to measure students' progress toward meeting those standards of proficiency. So in reading and math, the standard of proficiency as measured by the state is AASA. The standard of proficiency in Azella is measuring that progress of English language proficiency in those 4 different levels that are tested in Azella. So the data that we have, the date shows what date, so the number, we can change the language in the goal so that it says, for instance, the % of English learners increasing at least 1 placement level as measured by iReady reading diagnostic will increase from 48% in 2023 to 56% by spring 2024, and do that spring
Oh.
2023 to 56% by spring 2024. Would that be helpful?
I think so, because I think that's how we made it when we did our goals. So I'm just kind of trying to figure out why I have my own small disconnect. So I think you're right. I think that might be the missing link for me. Yes, I think that's a
Yes.
great idea.
Okay, we can add that.
I'll make a quick note. You're noticing that some of these are about a year out. It's not a bad
Yeah.
move from your leadership team. Because they have the opportunity as well that if some of these aren't working out, as you'll notice in your SOFG manual, they have the ability to be able to pivot and switch up to what they think is going to be a better predictor to get you to your goal. Now, when they do that, they'll bring it back to you and they'll explain it to you. So just know that these can be fluid, especially in the first years we're getting off the ground. I think it's your administrative team has put a lot of deep thought into what are the best possible measurables that you could get. And that's what they're bringing forth to you. Sometimes they may find out that maybe it didn't work out that way. And if it does, they'll let you know.
Thank you for the extra clarification that it can be fluid and to expect it to be actually. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Just a comment, I wouldn't expect that the Ames Ready or the iReady diagnostic test, correct me if I'm wrong in how I proceed, what you said is, would be, we would pivot from those measurables because we have gone through with those vendors, and then also we've been using them for years. So is it that those will change, or is it that the inputs would change to that?
It's a great question.
Board Member Carrillo, I would say that the measurable is what we're looking at right now. In terms of the assessment used, those are the assessments that we have already in our curriculum, and they're aligned to the curriculum materials. I think what's more likely to change is that our inputs would be nice if they changed. But that's another story. No, our incomes are fine. I'm very appreciative. Our inputs would change. And those inputs would be things like when we recognize that our students aren't able to master something in reading, we come back to say, okay, so what training have our teachers been able to do? What practice do our teachers have in terms of being able to implement the curriculum that we've purchased? What are the standards that are we using the right amount of minutes for reading? So you've heard us talk a lot about the things like increasing reading to 90 minutes, increasing math time to 90 minutes. Those are the inputs that change because we believe those are going to help the outputs change and then ultimately the outcomes as well.
Thank you for clarifying, because it kind of had a like come to reality moment like about the assessment. So thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, I'm going to add one more. You may, not to say here, but it has happened where a board has gotten so laser focused in monitoring that they pick up patterns that, and that's why you got to leave the administration to do the work, right? That's why you hire them and you pay them to do the work. You're simply monitoring. And by monitoring, you're sending a message throughout your entire system. Like, we're narrowly focused. And if some of these inputs aren't working out, they're going to be changing and pivoting because they know that when they bring them to you, you want to see progress. You want to see movement up. You want to see the trajectory changing. You may find yourself that during budget cycle, that when they come to you, they may come asking you for inputs to fund that are going to be correlated to your goals and your guardrails, because that's what you're communicating, telling your community. We are taking this serious, and we're not taking that off of the website or any of that until we get to those numbers. And in anticipation of what that might look like, you as a board want to be vigilant and monitoring and asking questions at the board meeting. You know, what are the inputs that are working? What are the inputs that are not working? What's the plan moving forward? That's going to be some really good progress monitoring on your end as well. Good question.
All right, and now I've lost track. Did we do goal 4 yet? Okay, goal 4. Goal 4 is the percent of 8th grade students with a pass rate on reading as per the AASA is going to increase from 29% on August 2023 to 44% by August 2028. And so that's the language that we will begin to mirror in our interim goals moving forward. So in interim goal 4.0, increasing the percentage of 5th grade students performing on grade level from 23% to more than 28% by spring of 2024, as measured by the iReady reading diagnostic. Then in interim goal 4.1, increasing the percent of 6th grade students performing on grade level from 23% to more than 28% by spring 2024, as measured by the iReady reading diagnostic. And then interim goal 4.2, increasing the percent of 7th grade students performing on grade level from 26% to more than 31% by spring 2024, as measured by the iReady reading diagnostic. And so you're noticing we go from a 3rd grade, or excuse me, an 8th grade goal, and these are predictors of how we will get to that 8th grade goal. So we have 5th grade, 6th grade, and 7th grade. 4th grade is absent because we think if we're hitting the mark with our 3rd grade students, the change in instruction is not significantly different than what they begin to do once they get into 5th grade. The level really ramps up, and that's where we've got to get students focused if we're going to hit the 8th grade goal that we've set.
My apologies if I just haven't put the pieces together in my brain yet, but so progress monitoring, interim goals, and then the main goal is until 2028. So are there more interim goals for next year, or is that how this works?
Board Member Vink, what we will do is as we are, so the interim goal is for the next year.
Okay,
And then that's the 23 to 24 interim goal.
okay.
If we look at that and see, ooh, we made horrible errors in judgment and we need to revise those either through inputs and outputs, that gives us that flexibility to be able to make that change. But we want to report to you on a regular basis where we are in hitting those interim goals so that you have a strong degree of confidence that the interim goals are going to help us get the broad goal number 4 or 3, 2, 1, or 5.
Okay, so then if we reach those goals, then there are new interim goals for, okay, thank you.
And if it helps to explain, Board Member Vink, when we're looking at these, this is part of what's going to help us understand if in fact our mathematics in correlating the performance on the iReady is going to in fact correlate to success on AASA, because in addition to being able to show you whether we hit those interim goals, in the fall, we'll also be able to show you where we are in relationship to the AASA. And so that's going to also be a good measure for us to be able to say, yes, we are on track, or woo, time to pivot.
Thank you. These are all really great questions. So I appreciate it, Dr. Vink. Don't feel like you're out of the loop, but these are all just very good clarifying questions. I think we're ready to move on to goal number 5.
All right, goal number 5, the percent of 8th grade students with a pass rate on math as per AASA will increase from 13% on August 2023 to 38% by August 2028. So interim goal 5.0 is increasing the percent of 5th grade students performing on grade level from 26% this past spring to more than 31% by spring of 2024, as measured by the iReady math diagnostic. Then interim goal 5.1, increase the percent of 6th grade students performing on grade level from 26% in spring of 2023 to more than 31% by spring of 2024, as measured by the iReady math diagnostic. And then interim goal 5.2, increase the percent of seventh grade students performing on grade level from 20% in spring 2023 to more than 25% by spring 2024, as measured by the iReady math diagnostic.
Questions? Dr. Ramos, would you mind wrapping up our goals before we move on to the guardrails?
Sure. So in your board adopted goals, you have set the goalpost as a board of where you expect your superintendent to go towards. So, and then now they've given you the measurables. In other words, what are some of the routes that they're going to take to prove to you that they're going to be able to get there? And so you're not going to wait to the end of the year to know if you win or lose the game. You're now going to know quarterly if you're winning or losing the game. And you'll have the chance as a board to ask questions. And again, this is the very empowering piece, because when you're leaning into your role and you're allowing them to do their jobs in educating and putting all the inputs and outputs in place, you're able to monitor to see if your outcomes are gonna be, if they're gonna meet those outcomes. So that's the goals. Now, and then now we talk about the guardrails. And the guardrails, as you may recall, it's like riverbanks for supporting the goals. It's being able to get to the student outcome goals, and also being honest and communicating very transparently with the superintendent and with your community. What are some of the pain points that you've heard or that you've seen as board members, as community members? And so you identified some guardrails as well. And as you'll notice, those guardrails were not in smart format, but the measurables do have to be in smart format, because you want your superintendent to be able to quantify to you how she's addressing and getting rid of these pain points for you and your community. So the analogy used, it's if I order an Uber or Lyft, I put in the destination that I want to go to. In the analogy, the destination is the vision, which are the goals. You're from the community, you know this community better than anybody. So what you're saying is there might be some routes here that might not be a good way to move, or there's some things that we kind of would really want to get addressed and taken care of. So there's a route that I would say, Dr. Hagegat, we'd recommend you just be mindful of this. And so what you see here are some guardrails that you as a board have identified. And she's now coming to you with measurables of what she believes are going to be ways to be able to address to make sure that those kinds of things are resolved and taken care of. The idea here is to not have guardrails, the same guardrail 3, 4, 5 years later. The idea here would be that the guardrails have been addressed and taken care of. You've got a ton of guardrails, meaning that what you probably hear from community members, and your stakeholders, is things that they don't think are going as well, things that maybe need to be addressed. So what you do is that's the other outcome. That's the adult outcome portion of the governance framework. You're doing your student outcomes and your goals, and now we're talking about the other and the adult outcome. And to be transparent and pretty blunt, right? It's that a lot of board members typically want to be focused in this arena, whether it's budget, facilities, athletics, parent engagement. All of those are absolutely important. You're only allowed to pick from 1 to 5, and you've already selected yours that you also vetted in your community. So now it's time to say, superintendent, can you prove to me that these measurables are going to address the guardrails that we brought forth to you? And you get to ask questions about those, and then have the same convo as you did with the board goals. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you. I think we're ready for the superintendent guardrails and interim guardrails.
Thank you, President Bueno. So the superintendent guardrail number 1 again is the superintendent shall not allow the district to operate without reciprocal and effective communication between the board, district employees, and community stakeholders. So we have 3 different interim guardrails here that address communication. And the first one is specific to giving our community the opportunity to be more knowledgeable regarding what goes on at our board meetings. And so we have by May 2024 communication to employees, parents, and the larger community regarding governing board discussion and actions will increase from 0 governing board meeting highlights to 11 board meeting highlights as measured by the creation of 11 governing board meeting highlights and their distribution to employees, parents, and community.
In this goal, can you use the number 11 since we use 0 as the number? Instead of writing out 11?
Yes, absolutely.
What is the timetable for when the governing board highlights will be distributed?
The goal is to have them a day or 1 day or 2 days after each one of our meetings. So for example, for this study session, we would want to have the highlights ready either tomorrow or the next day, and we want them in English and Spanish.
And why was it decided that it would be the governing board highlights?
The way we looked at the data, I went in and checked some of the attendance, whether it be here in person or whether it be virtually. And we're seeing that we're not having our community members at large get the information. So we felt this would be one way for us to put the outcomes of what's being shared and decided at our board meetings so that our community and our employees, parents are more engaged with what we're doing at the board level.
And what are the methods of distribution to the community members, employees, parents?
We'll have with our employees, it'll be via email, and then our community, this would go to, if approved, it would go to our principals to distribute to their communities. We would use our website and our social media so that everybody gets what we have here with the highlights.
Are you aware that each school site also has a newsletter on their website that they are able to sign up?
Yes, they have newsletter, they have Class Dojo, they haven't, so far, we're also committing time and effort into Parent Square. So that would be another way that we'll be able to distribute. Right now, we're just in the training stages of that resource.
And so you described methods and ways that communication to people that are already aware of Phoenix #1, but we also have a greater community that is disengaged. Myself, for example, I don't have kids, so I would be disengaged other than, the research I've done on Phoenix #1. So what is the plan to engage other stakeholders that live in the community?
We've done different ways, but I'm gonna defer to our community executive director of communication to share with us some of those so that we can share it to our business partners. There's different lists right now. We are going to welcome her next week, and we will give you an update about how we're going to be able to stretch all this information outside of those individuals that are not engaged currently with our system.
You just said that we've done something. What have we done other than the business stakeholder?
What we've been able to do with other communication is we've been able to send postcards to our community. We've been able to put different information on magazines. For example, our student enrollment campaign, we've been able to reach beyond this. This is just not something for the highlights yet that we have a formal plan, but certainly something that we can look at so that we can put our information out there from our board.
So the enrollment one's not a good example. Like I just said, if I were to receive an enrollment piece, that would not pertain to me. So what marketing strategies will be used to speak to the single person that lives downtown that could possibly give in different ways, whether it be monetary, whether it be volunteering? What does those strategies look like to communicate to the community?
Yeah, we'll be able to use our business partners for that in order for us to distribute information. Again, what we want to do here is initially engage our immediate community because we don't have that much engagement right now. And then as we continue to grow with our guardrails and the goals, we'll be able to engage the larger community as well.
I'm still not, you keep referring to a specific group the business stakeholders, I'm trying to get you to understand that you need to communicate with the residents that live here.
Yeah, and in the past, we've done that through a mail out with our postcards and flyers. We've been able to put information such as our educational showcase that we had in the past. And so we intend to use those types of strategies that have worked for us for the larger community.
You haven't mentioned the newsletter.
We have the Phoenix #1 magazine that goes out to all of our stakeholders. It gets mailed to them. And so we intend to use that as well for our marketing.
And when
again,
was the
there's
last
many-
time that went out?
That one, we had our very last one, I believe it was it was the spring. It was right in between our quarters. We were only able to engage with 2 last year.
Is that a typical standard that we should be expecting, is 2 newsletters?
No, our hope is that we have at least 1 per quarter. And so I started working with 1 myself. And as soon as our executive director is here, they will take off with that. We want it to be quarterly.
Also, I would encourage you to think about an electronic newsletter as well. There's different methods I've suggested to you, the electronic newsletter, the yard signs, QR codes. There's just a lot of endless possibilities. And so to me, this interim guardrail goal is kind of vague, and I just really need some better substance. These are all different stakeholder groups, and they all require their different strategies. And so to me, what's apparent is the disconnect between how to communicate with our community. So please work on that.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing those up. I was also going to encourage using the Family Center too, to disseminate information, and then continue the communications through the digital newsletter and then the paper copy too, that we're using in the past. Understand why that got disrupted. And hopefully our new executive director of communications can take those on and disseminate information that way as well.
Thank you.
I am wondering, so our guardrails are very large. Some of them feel very large, and this one feels like a tall order to put in one thing. So how does that I think you said like the guardrails should change, but do the interim guardrails change? Like, should a superintendent focus on small pieces of that at one time? Like, we could only have 5, so it looks like we put about 20 into 5. And I'm just, how does that navigate?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And this is obviously what I would call a pain point, for your community and for the board. And so this is the beginning of addressing that. And your superintendent and leadership team have spent a good amount of time, trying to figure out how they're going to be able to attack this challenge. And that's what they're bringing forth. And the feedback you give, right? I just would caution, like, I'm glad you're giving feedback, and that's what she's needing. I'm also would caution, don't tell her what to do, because then that's out of your role, right? And this is that tug and pull that happens here. But again, it's the reason why it exists in the framework. We're putting it out in the open, in front, versus, assuming it's going to get taken care of, or I talked to you about it, it should have been done. Here, you as a board, you're putting it in writing, and you're going to be monitoring it. And so, yeah, this one is a tall order, and this is a pretty common one, because as I'm hearing the conversation in the dialogue, I don't know that this could be taken care of in 1, 2, or 3 years, right? What you do have, though, is evidence that you've begun to address it. That is a part that you're going to have moving forward.
So then, with that in mind, that it is big and may not be able to, this may stay as a guardrail for several years, then is it typical for the interim guardrails to just be chunks of something, or are we expecting these 3 interims to address this huge thing?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. Because she's also going to be coming to you with inputs. In other words, she's going to be coming to you, asking you for resources to address this. And you as a board are going to be prepared, right, to ask questions and decipher, is this going to be worth it? Now, at the same time, you've given her a task to do. And she's saying, I'm gonna work on it. I'm gonna get on it. So with that comes, when she comes with requesting inputs, the dialogue will ensue again, right? So the other thing is, this isn't gonna just go away and isn't gonna be something that's just gonna fester. You will continue to work through this collectively as a group, as a team, being able to decide how many resources do you have to address this. And I would say too, right, even though I'm saying don't recommend things, there is a balance here. You know what resources exist. Absolutely. Visit with her. Hey, have we ever thought about so-and-so? But be very careful not to cross the line to tell her to do something, because that's not, when you're dictating inputs and outputs again, the lines get blurry, and it can get pretty ugly pretty fast.
Okay, so Dr. Davila Hagiat, when you created these interim guardrails, are you expecting that these 3 things solve this whole guardrail?
No, I see them as a start
Okay,
for us to be able to address that communication that's reciprocal and effective.
okay. That is helpful. All of that is helpful. I think that my only concern with all of it is the effective piece. I'm not sure how we're going to know that these were effective, except for interim 1.1 has a space that says measured by attendee feedback forms. Should also be measured by the number of attendees. But otherwise, I don't know how we will know that they were effective. So.
Madam Chair, this is Carmen. Again, I have a quick share. Dr. Vinky, you hit on a good point as far as, will they encompass, everything? Will they this? And my understanding was that these interim goals and guardrails were to demonstrate our leadership's understanding of our vision when we created these and our priorities, and to be able to put them into her interpretation, and we are to, like she said earlier, we either will approve or she'll go back to the drawing board if they don't meet the vision. So I'm glad all that came out, because I do struggle with seeing these, hitting the right priorities, that I guess these were created in my memory from when we did this in December. So since we can't make any recommendations, or we shouldn't, I guess, we have to navigate that balance. If we, next meeting, if we vote on these, are they separate? I mean, do we get the opportunity to say, I guess, what does that look like when a time does come to vote on these later? Like, am I asking questions in this work study session because I know we're gonna say yes to some, no to others, or yes, no overall? Could we maybe get some clarification on what that looks like?
Absolutely. I would say that your interim goals should be voted on, and then you should have a separate vote for your superintendent interim guardrails. I would not recommend approving some and not the others. If you get to when you get to the board meeting and you have, right now, I would say, like, there's some that I'm just not really excited about. I'm not going to be convinced that it's going to get us to addressing the guardrail the way we had intended, it's a good time to say it, right? Because then you give your superintendent time to go back to the drawing board and work with that. All this has to be done in open session and forum. So the communication is vital and it's key right now. So the answer to your question is your interim goals will be approved, will be on one agenda item, and then your superintendent interim will be on a separate one. And it's all or nothing on both of those documents.
Thank you very much for clarifying.
You're welcome.
Just a note, just to clarify understanding, so my understanding that you're not saying you're saying don't say specifically, I want you to make the newsletter purple. You're not saying don't say I would like to see these interim guardrails focus more on our district employee relations, or can you tell me more about how or why there's not a focus on district employee relations, correct? Does that make sense? You have to say it though. I don't know if Carmen can see you. I can't see Carmen either. So I just want to flesh out like where this conversation goes now so that when we get to the voting part, we've been able to.
Yeah, I mean, you're giving your feedback and you're giving your thoughts on how you see this because you're the ones that described what the guardrail is. This session is to be able to flesh that out and give it enough time so that your superintendent can get the feedback that she's looking for from you. So yeah, it's just it's a fine line, right? And I think that you all are giving the feedback that she's looking for. I don't want to assume, right? Because yes, she and her team have worked diligently on it. And they also were open. From my conversation with them, they're completely open to know, are we on target? Are we not on target? Because when we bring it to you and you give it the thumbs up, it's go time. The game clock officially starts and we're going to have a new self-board evaluation and we're going to be running from that point on. So yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think I understand what the strategy for guardrail 1. I think like with guardrail 2, there's a way to measure that. I think that's what the board, it seems like, is looking for, a way to measure the impact of sending those newsletters, social media. For instance, I know through social media, those measurables are provided to you, right? Who saw what posts, how many, and so I would agree on just adding that component as we come to evaluate these to say, okay, this is how effective it was. This is the audience that it reached. And because I do understand also how that would be hard to measure if you're sending a newsletter, 30,000 copies of a newsletter to the community. Yeah, like how do you measure like they read that or received it? Thank you. That's all.
Thank you for the feedback. Then we have interim guardrail 1.1. By May 2024, two-way communication will increase from 0 superintendent four-corner town hall meetings for the superintendent to receive feedback directly from stakeholders to 4 superintendent four corners town hall meetings as measured by event dates and attendance feedback form. So this once again going out and reaching to the community and inviting them to come out and share both virtually and in person some of their thoughts and their feedback on what are the things that are going really well and what are the things that we can focus on so that we can serve our community better. Interim guardrail 1.2, by May 2024, employee two-way communication with the superintendent will increase from 0 WeCare emails to 5 to 10 as measured by the emails received on the WeCare@phoenixschools.org email address. This one is intended to open up for our employees a line that allows them to share thoughts that they may not be comfortable sharing at their workspace or with their department. At this time, the person that is handling the We Care at phoenixschools.org email, it's Ms. Valencia. Now, please know that the emails from 0 to 5 to 10, that is for us more of a baseline. Our hope is that our employees are able to have those conversations at their sites or with their departments. But if they don't feel comfortable, whether it be something that is too personal to share at campus, that they have a way to share with us, whether it's a personal concern so that we can provide the resources, or an employment concern so that we can address the challenge.
This is Carmen again, Dr. Davila Hagiga. How did this idea come about? Was it
This
employees asked for it?
No, this idea initially was shared at one of our check-ins with our board officers, yourself and Ms. Bueno, when we were speaking about some employees just not feeling comfortable coming straight to a specific department and needing a way to share their thoughts or concerns where they felt that it was a safer space, so that there wouldn't be what they felt would be retaliatory. And so that was in answer to that concern, and having an open line for our employees to just really share, similar to what we have right now for our community through our community relations email. This would be something that would function in a similar way.
Okay, that's a little confusing to me. If I remember, it was the subject we were talking about was having like a neutral third party for employees to be able to reach out to, so that way it was more trusting, because it wouldn't involve us. And but I might not be fully seeing your vision here, so I'm definitely open to hearing more about that. But I do understand that that was part of a request to have a neutral third party space for our employees to feel safe enough to go to, one that doesn't have leader, decision maker, and judge for things. So I would love to hear more about how that could work in that space. But right off the bat, it does cause me a little more concern.
Yes, and thank you for your feedback. And again, this would be for people that are still in a place where they want to be identifiable. Something that I believe that we can modify as part of this interest is the opportunity to see how this could also be anonymous, because there are families, or not families, our employees that may want to remain anonymous. I know that since our very last board meeting, we are looking at different opportunities that may be out there for something like that. And we're also connecting with legals to make sure that even with the third party, the concern is going to need to be addressed in-house, even if it comes from a third party. And so we're still doing some research in that area so that we can look at having it anonymous and seeing how it can be addressed, so that we really address the concern, because we value our employees and we want to make sure that they feel that they have a place where they can share their thoughts, where it's safe. So thank you for the feedback. We'll take it back and see what we can come up with that allows for that as well.
I appreciate the extra explanation. Because I think there could be a space for anonymous stuff, but my want, I guess, for employees would be that they have a space to go to, where I guess where we'll there's a place to kind of make sure that the message was received and that's communicated safely somehow. But in the past, like let's let's say just the example for board meeting comments, like we don't really know as a board how many, when those come in, who gets them, how many we receive, and who gets to, what is the word I'm looking for? Oh goodness, but who gets to decide, what comment makes it to the board and which one doesn't? And if it's an anonymous thing, it clearly will not make it to the board. So there is a fine line, but I just kind of wanted to shed more light as to why the thought was to have a neutral third party is to make sure that the information can be received, documented. I still can't think of the word I'm looking for, but someone's got the discretion to say, this is a valid concern, this is not, but also just to say, we had 10, we received 10, but only 3 didn't have cuss words or something. So those ones are getting moved forward. There's just a million ways to look at this, but I think it comes down to trusting the discretion of who gets to receive these messages and what happens with them.
Yes, I appreciate the clarity, as I believe we have the same vision of making sure that our employees have a space to share their thoughts and feel safe in doing so.
I appreciate that we're creating space for this. My question is just why is this going through Ms. Valencia rather than, it seems like this should be channeled to HR, head of HR or the HR department.
Yes, no, that's a great question as well. The reason that it went to Ms. Valencia, it was so that we could have that ability to have all of the departments. So if the concern was about HR, we would be able to address it. That was initially the thought that was shared when we met in December. And so we wanted to be mindful of what was shared with us. And that's why we brought it to the superintendency level so that it could be about any of the schools and or departments. We can certainly, typically it's human resources that addresses human resources challenges. And one of the reason is because the level of confidentiality is often high. And so we want to make sure that we maintain that.
Okay, thank you.
You raise a good point, Board Member Carrillo. Thank you for bringing that up. In my understanding of HR is more to protect the employer, the district, and not for employees. So I think that plays into this. So yeah, if we could kind of get an idea of what would happen when Mrs. Valencia receives these, that would be helpful. What does that process look like?
We haven't received any yet, but what we envision happening is I have the opportunity to review it and then see what kind of support is needed. I did get an inquiry from an employee regarding a topic, and it was clearly something that could be supported by HR. And they asked if they would need to use the We Care because they were giving me their as I was walking around the schools, I said that I would pass along, and that has already been addressed. But that is one example of how the employee would have put We Care. I read it and then pass it along to human resources. And so that's what we're thinking right now to make sure, because we know who in the district would be able to support the different areas to make sure that we connect. Of course, if it's something that is specific to an individual, then we would need to address that differently. We wouldn't send it to the individual. We would figure out what measures we need to take in order to support that employee. So I would be the one distributing that to the supports and or bringing those supports to the individual.
Okay, thank you.
Hearing no more questions, I think we can move to guardrail number 2.
Thank you. Interim Guardrail 2.0, by December 2023, employees will acquire knowledge of the customer care promise standards from 5% of employees learning the customer care promise and standards during the 22-23 school year to 100% of employees demonstrating knowledge of the customer care promise and standards as measured by Safe School Training Module completion. This particular goal, we already started with our customer care promise and standards, and our office managers and assistants and a few other people were trained this spring as they were the ones that created these customer promise and standards. And so our interest is to make sure that across our district with Guardrail 2.0, that everyone across the district is aware that this is how we are addressing customer service. And these are the expectations that we have for ourselves and our employees. And so that's specific to 2.1, and 2.2 would extend the same interest to our parents, guardians, so that they are aware that this is how we are addressing our customer care.
Are we still in 2.0 or did you already go down to 2.1?
I did 2.0 and 2.1 because they are very similar. One captures the interest of our employees, and then the second part to that is our students, parents, and guardians. We can divide it up. I just wanted to share with you how they both connect because we want to make sure that everybody has the information.
My concern with the understand guardrail 2.0, my concern with guardrail 2.1 is my focus isn't necessarily to see if they understand that we have the customer care promise and standards. It's how whether we're living up to those standards in this, and that our staff is showcasing that to the students. So I think this is a good way for our community to actually measure us on how we're doing on with those interactions that they have on a daily basis. And I don't want to encourage another survey. It seems like that might be the best way possible, is again gathering what their insight is with those interactions when they step into the office, when they talk with their teachers, and collecting that data from our community.
Yes, and we are interested also in understanding the impact of the customer care promise and standards on our parents and students and families, as well as our employees. We wanted to make sure that everybody understood what they were. And so for us, the follow-up would be a survey so that we have that information. And so we haven't rolled it out. I've introduced it to our staff, but we have not had a formal rollout yet. And so we're looking at safe schools to make sure that everybody understands it. And if they need any other support, that we bring that clarity. And our goal is definitely to make sure that it's being utilized so that our culture is one that is safe and nurturing for all.
That's great. And so next time I would like to see that in that guardrail. Again, more explicit way of how that information will be presented to us.
Yes, thank you for that feedback, because we do have here space for a 2.2. And so what we could do is once we introduce, we can see what that initial implementation looks like and treat it as a baseline.
Thank you.
I'm also wondering if there is a way to measure, it says 100% of students, parents, guardians receiving knowledge. I'm wondering how we're going to measure that the information, the knowledge And I feel like knowledge is maybe different than information too. So how we're gonna measure that that was received.
For 2.0,
Well, I guess,
2.0, we have the school safety training module completion, and that comes with a quiz that allows us to see where the understanding was with that. For 2.1, right now, it's more along the lines of being able to distribute that information and get it to the hands of 100% of our families. And so
Okay.
we don't have the reciprocal, and 2.2 would allow us to gather information on that baseline survey.
okay, I mean, right, because the hands of our families means that like someone's literally handing this information out, and I'm not sure whether we actually do that or not. Versus like dojo, some families don't get that message, or mailing things or whatever, so just the measurable for that one.
This is Carmen again. I agree of kind of having some way to have evidence that this takes place would be helpful to hear about, I guess.
I'm just gonna interrupt real quick because I need a favor. Mr. Manley, would you mind going to the front entrance and allowing our attorney into the building, please? Thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Dr. Davila Hagigat, can you speak a little bit to the part of the guardrail that says to foster trust and collaboration, and how these interim guardrails do that?
Absolutely. I think what we're aiming for here with the customer care promise and standards is to be able to treat everyone that comes into contact with us with respect, and be able to address their needs and show that they are valued. And so when we are able to reach that area, we will be able to foster that trust with our families. And so when we look at collaboration, part of the customer care promise and standards shows the input that we are interested in getting from our families. And so to be able to bring these to life and live by them, we would be able to really reach both of those. We want our families to know that we value them, and not just our families, but our employees as well. And so we will be able to really bring that consistency across our district as to what are the expectations of how we treat one another as part of the Phoenix #1 family. And those that visit us, to be quite frank, because not everyone has direct interactions with us.
So the customer care promise and standards has a collaboration component, is that?
Let me grab it so that I'm not coming up with things that's right there.
That might be good in the included in the items when we go to vote on this, so that we can review them.
Yes. On the side. So we have the space of showing excellence, responsiveness, acknowledging serve customers immediately, courteously, and respectfully, display a positive and calm demeanor, listen to concerns, and be able to respond in a timely manner. I can share these with you so that I don't have to read all of them. But what we're also interested in as we roll this out, as we get input and feedback, it may be that we're able to modify some of these if we're missing areas where it doesn't allow us to intentionally hit certain pieces. And right now, let's highlight collaboration. If it's not defined in a way that it's giving us the outcome that we want, then we would need to modify some of our customer care promise and standards so that it does hit that area as well of the guardrail.
Okay, yes, so it would be helpful for me to have that customer care promise and standards included in the packet when we go to vote on this, and then remind me, this customer care promise, is this something that we created in-house, or is it a program that came from something?
It was, I look at Ms. Valencia because she's from we created in-house, and it was with our office managers, our assistant managers, and they took last year to bring this to the document that we see today.
Perfect. So it sounds like it can be tailored to meet our needs, to foster that trust and collaboration. Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. These have all been really good questions. I myself am really struggling to wrap my head around these two. I'm just not sure that they're quite hitting the mark, because I think, to your point, Dr. Vink, like, how do you measure the knowledge, with the in 2.1, but I appreciate your feedback. So I'm just looking forward to seeing what the updated ones will be. Any questions, Ms. De La Rosa? We can move on to guardrail number 3, and if you wouldn't mind also stating what the guardrail is.
Absolutely. Guardrail number 3, the superintendent shall not allow the district to operate without a system designed to recruit, employ, and retain diverse staff who reflect the community and meet the needs of our urban district students and their learning environments. Interim guardrail 3.0. By September of 2025, the district will demonstrate an increase in diverse staff who reflect the community and meet the needs of our urban district students and their learning environments through the development and the implementation of the Phoenix #1 Recruit, Employ, and Retain Plan as measured by comparing the 2023-2024 baseline data to the 2024-25 post-plan implementation data.
Could you elaborate on what the plan implementation data is?
Yes, what we're looking at here is increasing our presence in different colleges, different organizations that allow us to reach out to individuals that are from more diverse backgrounds so that we're able to bring those models and have them in front of our students so that they can see themselves within that profession. And so for us, we're going to be able to continue to reach to some of the colleges that we've been successful with, but we also need to expand on some that we haven't had an opportunity to have consistency with. And so it's really having that plan. Our goal right now is to make sure that a lot of what we see right now in human resources has not been put in a consistent document to where we can say, this is what we can duplicate, this is what we can replicate. And so that's something that Dr. Bowman and his team will be able to bring together so that we have something that really shows this have been the outcomes when we've been going to whatever place to bring in these diverse staff. So this is something that we still need to make sure that we put together, and our goal is to compare the 23-24. So we're going to take our data from this year, do the plan implementation once it's developed, and then compare it to 24-25 and beyond to see what has higher level of effectiveness, what strategies are giving us the outcomes that we're looking for.
Do
May
the
I
guardrails,
ask?
I'm sorry, just real quick, the guardrails, they also have progress measurables? Because it just seems kind of far out. We have to wait till September 2025.
You're saying, does the interim guardrail have measurables?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what they're demonstrating right there. Yes.
Okay.
And you're gonna look at these twice a year. Yeah, your goals, your interim goals are 4 times a year.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Trujillo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was kind of wondering when we do get to see the data. So could you maybe touch on what our numbers are, I guess, looking like right now? It doesn't have to be in general, but like, I just want to fully understand what exactly we're gonna see. What does that data look like?
I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bowman. He will share with you.
Which is Hispanic and non-Hispanic, and race, which includes Black, Asian, Pacific Islanders, but not Hispanic. So to me, the two together, to say with confidence 100% that that's what it is. So I also have a little bit of vetting to do.
Dr. Bowman,
Yes.
the last few words are pretty much the only words I understood. I can't see physically, but I was wondering if you might be able to step closer to the mic.
Okay. Is this better?
It sounds like Charlie Brown on my end. My apologies. Perhaps it's my connection.
Is this better?
Yes, I can hear you much clearer.
The state level data that we have, I did look at this a while back, and what it shows is, oh, I got to find it. Is that the 23 school year, we had 41.2% white and 47.6% Hispanic and 7.4% Black. That's all staff members. So that's through the state reporting. And then when you break that down by race, if you make the big assumption of, oh, I did that on a different page. I'm just not quite 100% with it.
Okay, take your time.
Now, if you look at race and you look at Hispanic going to the white, because that's the way the state did it, I believe, is we have 88% white and 7.4% Black and 4.6% all others in the race category. So we have the data now from the last year reporting, and we'll have it again in the 23-24 school year. And that can to our student demographics also from the state website, that we had 5.8% white students, 78.4% Hispanic, 9.8% Black, and then the rest of the percentages for all other. So I did looking at the numbers, and my since tonight before you is just I am a statistician and kind of a psychometric guy. And unless I can validate my numbers, I don't like to make too much of them yet. It's a yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that helpful in some way?
It is. And so I will assume that when we do get, more data after you've crunched it and looked at it, that we would be able to see where these numbers show up as far as, whether it's in the classroom, on our grounds, in the district office, that kind of thing.
Yep, and we have to be mindful in this plan area around governing board policy GBA, which is the equal employment opportunity one. So as we are looking at a guardrail to increase our diversity of staff, that's where when Dr. Hagi got mentioned our partnerships and expanding partnerships to grow qualified applicants to our district, regardless of what they bring to us, then that's going to allow us to improve our diversity. That's my opinion. I equally share that. So among many other ways, but that's one way.
Okay, can you maybe touch on the policy understanding so we understand that part more, just to again
Just-
be aware of it?
Equal opportunity employment is we can't discriminate based upon race, color, sex. There, I don't have them all memorized, but it's just, we have to make sure that we're employing and not discriminating against any individual who we hire.
Oh, okay, that's understandable.
Yep.
Thank you. And that's actually that's why the guardrail is actually important, Dr. Bowman, because that's how we can figure out a way to create this community that does best support our kids, because we're focused on student outcomes. And not so much, of course, that policy is not the priority, but what does our hiring look like now that we're focused on our students' futures and those things, as opposed to, you know, keeping in line with red tape and things like that. So it's a mindset shift here. That's what this work is about. Because the motto here is our student outcomes do not change until our adult behaviors do. So I completely understand the caution about not discriminating, because that's never okay. But that's exactly what this work is for, to help us create the best community, the best scenarios, the best trajectory for our students. So that's just my opinion that I'm sharing. So that way I'm standing in my integrity about why this is important to the board. And I know you're just still getting to know us, and I'm grateful you decided to join the Phoenix #1 community. So I look forward to doing this work alongside each other.
I appreciate that. And this is a great area of interest of mine as well. And I welcome this this opportunity.
Dr. Vink, did you have a question?
I did. My question is on the diversity piece and whether I remember when we were drafting these, yes, I want diverse staff, but my biggest concern, and this was last school year, where some of our students had interim teachers or not teachers. So my biggest concern at the time was the employment piece, where all of our students had a teacher. And I just want to make sure that that is highlighted or included in all of that when we are looking at that data. I don't know whether it needs to be in another interim guardrail or not, but I'm just wondering if that was included when you crafted this.
Yes, and if I'm understanding your thought correctly, is to make sure that every child has a qualified teacher in the classroom. And so this is why the retain, not just the recruit and employ, but the retain part was very important too. So I think as we bring information to you and with our data, we'll be able to see how many were we able to retain, recruit, and employ, with, of course, the goal of having someone qualified in front of our kids.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. The goal is qualified and that our students have teachers that look like them. I agree with that. I just, goal number 1 is have a teacher. Okay. And then when do we expect to see the plan?
That is an absolute great question. Our goal is to work on this semester and part of the first quarter, because we want to make sure that we start to hit the different areas quickly, probably by January, if not earlier, we need to be out there. And so Dr. Bowman is getting his feet wet extra quickly, and then he'll be able to produce the first draft of what this could look like with a team of stakeholders.
And then for like SOFG and the monitoring and things like that, technically, we would not need a plan until we were set up for like that first monitoring. The plan would have to be in place before then, but do we keep track of when are we supposed to demand the plan be done by this date or care, or how does that, sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Bowman.
Yeah, no, excellent question. And that goes back to the monitoring calendar. Because when they put that together, they're also going to have when they're going to bring you the interim, when they're going to bring you the guardrails. And so it'll tell you guardrail number 3 will be January and June or whatever that looks like. So what they can do though is because they're putting the systems and processes in place based on you having now identified the goals that you want. Part of that is going to be what they've done from here. So let's say it's January. Part of it's going to be what they've done up until that point. And then in 6 months, you'd want to see the growth in the data and the numbers that are going to come with that.
Okay, and then secondary question, in agreeing to something like this guardrail, if the board approved this, we're also saying we're going to put resources behind that, right? So I mean, it's kind of, again, a big thing. These guardrails for me are like 20 guardrails.
Yep.
So recruit, employ, and retain, that could need a lot of resources. But so by approving that, we're saying, okay, we're going to, okay. Thank you.
That's correct. And the way it's going to look again is the language, it's the ABCs of governance. What are the inputs that are working? What are the inputs that are not working? What are the inputs that you're asking for in order to address this? Correct. Question?
So then at this point, do we ask if it is realistic to for the district to be able to provide the resources for something like this at this point in time?
Well, I think I'm making an assumption that there are probably some inputs that have already been in play. It's not like any of this hasn't been addressed. It's that now the board is narrowing its focus on it. So by you narrowing your focus, they are narrowing their focus to tell you what inputs they've already been using. There is a probability that some inputs may need a little bit more support, right? But I would venture to think that they have been in somehow, some way, been working towards this, and that's what you're going to find out when you do the monitoring. So the teachers, for example, what does that look like? It's not like they haven't been talking about it. It's not like they've been neglecting that, right? But now because you've narrowed your focus, you're allowing them to do the same and to present to you what they already have. And you're right, budget season, right, comes around pretty quickly. Again, the way this works is they're going to prioritize your goals and your guardrails during budget cycle. And it's going to be to prove to you that the budget is going to work to address that first. And that means that you may have some tough decisions to make as a board. Because in order to really truly identify or deal with guardrail number 3, there might be some inputs that you might need to let go in other arenas because there's only so many resources to go around.
That's exactly my thought is, you haven't been here each meeting, but we did have some budgeting situations and we have fixed a lot of things and we've given staff more money, but we approve this and it comes up in order to be fully staffed. Do we need to pay everybody, whatever ridiculous amount of money I can come up with? And that doesn't exist. So, but just reassure me that we have considered these things.
We have considered it and we need to continue to consider it because as priorities shift, so do budgets. And so we want to make sure that we have the other reassurances that part of this is allowing us to formalize some of what's already in place and then extend some of those missing areas. And so we're not starting from 0, but we're formalizing what we already have that in some cases has already been budgeted for.
Mr. Carrillo, did you have a question? Okay, hearing none, we can move on to guardrail number 4.
Guardrail for the superintendent shall allow the district to operate without a site budget process where resources are allocated equitably. Interim guardrail 4.0 by May 2024, the district will increase from 0 out of 14 sites having a site budget in 22-23 to 14 out of 14 sites having an individual site budget during the 23-24 school year, as demonstrated by site leaders' ongoing access and their ability to print monthly budget reports from their general ledger. Again, this one, we believe it begins to satisfy the need for budgets. We were not utilizing site budgets in the past. And so when Mr. Manley came on board, he and his team started to look at what would be the best way for us to have this site budget process be a reality. And this guardrail, I know, was very important for our board as our sites did not have budgets.
Can you do a very quick and simple, what is a site budget? Like, how is that different from everything else?
Sure, Governor Bill, thank you for the question. Basically, we need to empower principals to know what resources that they have for their school. So coming into this position and meeting with several principals, it became clear that for a long time, years, the principals did not have access to the resources that they were going to receive, but they didn't have a level of specificity to know that they have a specific allocation in capital and M&A funds for their children based on US coding, so that they kind of our principals were shooting in the dark by and large. They didn't have access to the resources that they needed to make those decisions. So the site budget process is selfish from the CFO's point of view, in that giving principals access to know what resources they have out of it's really 3 big buckets. It's M&O buckets, capital, and their cash accounts. That gives them the ability to look at the resources that they know that they have and self-serve to know that there's a source of truth and visions that points to the allocations that they have based on the number of students that they have on their campus, so that they can activate requisitions and purchase orders and plan based on the resources that they know that they have for the year. So since coming on board and working with folks for the last few months and really planning since April, we were able to generate the allocations that go towards each individual site and train the principals and their office managers so that they can know what resources they have, know how to access them, and then know how to turn those resources into requisitions and purchase orders or people or whatever they need at their site. So it's really taking a look at the global district budget and then allocating that by site based on student population, so that principals and their teams know what they have to work with. And so we've been successful at that. I trained all of our teams at once on one day, and then I met individually with sites, some principals twice, some principals a third time, because they really were into the USFR. We just got some updated function codes that they republish the USFR every year. So we're updating our cheat sheet code that we posted on June 15th to give our principals and office managers that knowledge so that they can self-serve and know what they have. So that's really the gist of it, is empowering principals and sites to know what resources that they have for their school, for their kids, so that there's not a middleman or have enough that they need now, so that they can make decisions now and then plan for the whole school year.
Okay, so talk me through how this makes things more equitable. Anyone?
Sure, I can address that so much. So when you're looking at the populations at a school, first of all, we want to make sure that there is I'm going to say equal distribution amongst the number of kids versus how much like toilet paper and soap that you need out of your custodial supply line. And then working with like federal programs, we're looking to, and so we have a baseline allocation for site funding and capital and the cash pieces that they have based on student population. And we're going to take federal components. The next iteration would be taking a look at student populations like title, English learners, percentage of special ed populations by site, and creating like a SWOT scale. We haven't done that yet, but site budgets are in place. Federal program allocations in Title I do have a more equitable base, but the first step is making sure that principals have an allocation and know how to use visions of our accounting software. And that was the first step. And so that has been successful. So now principals, and I'm looking at one of the principals in the audience, now has access to that on their machine, so they know what resources that they have.
So have we changed the amount of funding sites are getting based on their needs yet?
Well, I kind of invented it this year because that process hadn't been a thing for years. So the M&O and the capital budget was strictly based on student population, based on formula that I got from the Field for Best Practices. But the next step that I see for next school year would be to build in an equity framework that would help with the M&O and capital pieces, which is usually just a per pupil allocation. And I'd like to see that reflected in the subpopulations at sites. So that would be the next iteration of we've sort of already, I didn't mean to trump and get all 14 sites to get site budgets before we talked about this, but they really needed them. But the next steps are to build in more robust equity pieces. And that could also be like how the district controls the district gifts and donations pieces. There's plenty of room that we can look at how we can equitably distribute some of the things that we have. Some strict allocations like Title I, where we can't change how those work from the federal government, but we do have some flexibility on how we can distribute our controlled funds based on a higher degree of need.
Okay, I think that's the only thing for me that's missing from the guardrail is how we're going to know that the budgets are equitable. Thank you.
I think we're ready for number 5.
Thank you. Guardrail number 5, the superintendent shall not allow the district to operate without implementing a community-focused plan to mitigate student enrollment barriers. An interim guardrail 5.0. By May 2024, enrollment registration barriers will decrease from 0 online enrollment access for parents and guardians to register their children during the 22-23 school year to 100% online access during the 23-24 school year through the use of the online enrollment platform as measured by access to online enrollment. I'd like to start by saying this is the beginning of us being able to start to decrease barriers for us. Enrollment had been a challenge where we were still doing things only paper pencil. And so this was introduced this year. Our MAS department worked really diligently in making sure that we were able to roll this out.